What's going on, guys? My name is Steve. Thank you for stopping by my channel. Today we're going to be reacting to Solving the Mystery of Stonehenge. I think Stonehenge is one of those places that most people in the Western world have probably heard of, but I think there's a lot of us that have never really truly explored this topic. I'm sure I learned a little bit about Stonehenge when I was in school, but I don't really remember much of anything about this place. Obviously, I understand that it's a very ancient site. I think it has a lot of mystery behind it from what I understand, which I guess is the meaning behind this title. And I understand that it basically is these very large stone pillars that are in a circle sort of, and some are stacked on top of each other's. And it's kind of like the pyramids in a way. It's like, how in the world did these people build something like this so long ago? Things like this I've always found interesting, or at least, for most of my adult life, I found things like this interesting. As a kid, I guess I really didn't care as much about things like this, like history and whatnot, but I definitely enjoy these types of topics and exploring these types of places as an adult. This is definitely a topic I've had on my list since I started this journey, and it's just something I haven't got around to until now. Obviously, this is probably one of the most popular ancient sites in the world, I'm guessing. I don't know that for sure, but I'm under the impression that pretty much everybody knows the word Stonehenge, or they know of this place. And I just think a lot of people are like me in that they've really never looked into it to kind of learn more about it. I've never really seen Stonehenge from a ground perspective. I think the image I have in my head is kind of from above. So I've probably seen some pictures or something, taken from drone or whatever. But anyways, guys, I have no idea what to expect here, but I think this is going to be very interesting. Like I said, this is a topic I've been wanting to explore for a while because it's one of the few ancient sites within the UK that I kind of knew of before starting this journey. And so it's just something that's been on the radar for quite a while, and it's definitely about time that I finally dive in and explore this topic. So anyways, guys, let's go ahead and check out Solving the Mystery of Stonehenge.
I've come to one of the most famous, the most recognizable historical sites on planet Earth. But for all its fame, it remains a deeply mysterious place, an enigma. We know virtually nothing about who built it or why. Stonehenge.
Wow. Wow. Those pillars are so huge.
No matter how many times I come to Stonehenge, it never loses its sense of magic. Its position in the middle of this wide open plain and raised up, looking at this wonderful view all around. And then of course the stones themselves, which have remained upright since they were erected by our Stone Age ancestors over 4,000 years ago. It's a place to come and think about the passing of time, how small and irrelevant.
Okay, I have a couple questions right off the bat. One, are these stones buried in the ground any? Because I can imagine they're just sitting on the top. They have to be buried some. And I wonder how deep they're buried. And two, I'm just seeing this, amazing countryside. Where in the world did these stones come from? And they had to come from, not in this area, right? I can't imagine they came from this area, looking at the countryside around there. So how in the world did they get them here from wherever they were? And then how did they put them up? Anyway, maybe he'll answer, some of those questions.
Our little lives are compared to the generations that these stones have seen. And then, of course, you just marvel at the construction. It all began around 3000 BC with the ditch and the mound out there. You can just see it there. And then at about 2500 BC, they added these blue stones. Now, what's amazing about these is that these heavy stones, each weighing more than a ton, were brought not from nearby, but from South Wales. They've identified the quarries in South Wales where these were from. And that was done in the Stone Age with no wheels,
So
no axles, no metal tools. The countryside would have been wooded. And they still don't really know how they achieved that.
So I don't know exactly where Stonehenge is within the UK. I think it's northern England, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I believe it's northern England. And if that's the case, no matter what, I can tell that's a long distance to be bringing these stones. I wonder how they did that. And like you said, the landscape probably looked totally different. This farmland was probably woods. Wow. Okay. Let's continue.
And then from 2,500 BC onwards, you start to get development of this site for about 500 years. So they rearrange the bluestones and then they add these giant Sarsens. And these Sarsens were put in a huge circle. The bluestones were then rearranged in a circle, and with an inner circle and outer
So
circle.
cool, man.
You've got these great big pillars here and you've got lintels up there. Now these work exactly like Lego. You have a little knob on top of all of these standing up
What?
stones, and then the lintel slots onto that, holding it in place.
Are you kidding me?
Where these huge stones came from has long been a mystery, but now we know, thanks to some brand new research. In the 1950s, rock samples were taken from deep inside one of the Sarsen stones as part of conservation work. The samples then disappeared. But recently, one of those cores was found in America and returned to the UK. By analysing the rock, researchers have discovered that they came from an area in the Marlborough Downs called the West Woods. The site is 25 kilometres north of Stonehenge, but how the builders transported these huge stones remains a mystery.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
It's a place
Wow.
of such power now, even though we're used to huge structures and grand vistas. Can you imagine 2,500 years BC? This would have been jaw-dropping. Much of Britain was covered by a vast forest, but this part of Salisbury Plain was clear of trees. It's still in chalk soil, so just the setting would have been spectacular. And then you'd have arrived
So
here,
that would make it
and you'd have seen a gleaming white monument. Many of these stones have become darker, they've weathered down.
Oh.
They would have been much, much brighter. So you'd have walked up to this beautiful, gleaming set of stones. Even bigger stones forming a structure in the middle, with perhaps that altar stone there as the centerpiece.
Sorry, guys. I don't mean to pause so much, but I just keep on having things that pop in my head. I can imagine that. So if this was one big area that didn't really have a ton of trees compared to the rest of the UK, basically, that was really forested, I can imagine you come out of the forest and you see this beautiful white stones, this bright stone kind of sitting in the center of this open area. I can imagine what a sight that would be to behold. And I can't believe they actually kind of made knobs like a Lego to put the capstone, I don't know what else you'd call it, capstones on top. And so I'm curious, is Stonehenge right now, is that the way it's looked since it was finished? Or I'm guessing stones have never been taken away because they're so huge, there's no way they would have just took them away. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, what are they trying to build here?
What's fascinating, though, is that the more research they do on this site, the more they discover. Recent laser technology has revealed something they never thought was possible. That these lintel stones here on top, those are not just rectangular bricks, just each one moved slightly so you create the impression of a circle. They have actually been rounded off, so they are in fact a circle. That is extraordinary knowledge of geometry, let alone stonemasonry, for 4,500 years ago. And so, in fact, there's a very, very slight curve on all of these lintels. And they're doing that. They're shaping that with nothing other than smaller stone hammers, with which they're smashing them into shape.
So were they trying to build a full circle here?
This is the Stone Age.
Question.
There's no bronze, there's no metal working, there's no iron, certainly. They're using stone tools and antlers. And if you check this out,
And antlers.
if you look at all the pitting on this Sarsen stone here, it looks like weathering, but it's not. These are actually the marks of thousands and thousands of strikes with a stone hammer.
What?
And so all of these were individually shaped, rounded off,
What?
completed by thousands of hours of craftsmen hitting it with little stones.
Wow. Well, there's a road right over there. Okay, so this is not far from the road. You wouldn't have a very long hike to get to this site.
One other remarkable recent discovery is they've worked out that Stonehenge is actually on a very slight slope. That side, the east side, is lower than up here on the west. But extraordinarily, the builders have accounted for that and levelled it by using slightly shorter stones here and taller stones down there, so that the ring of lintels is dead flat. Now, how they do that without a spirit level, I've got no idea.
Wow.
We know frustratingly little about the people that built Stonehenge. We don't know how they were organised as a society, whether it was one tribe or a group that perhaps covered the whole of Britain. There are some clues. These bluestones come from South Wales. That implies that there was a mode of exchange between the people that live there and the people of South Wales. We also know that in a nearby camp that seems to have been built for the people that constructed this site, there were animals, remains, feasting had taken place there. And those animals were brought from as far away as the north of Scotland. And so it's been suggested that Stonehenge was not just the product of the people that lived around here, but perhaps some kind of effort that stretched for hundreds of miles across Britain, from southern England to northern Scotland and the west of Wales. And that suggests a political sophistication, an organisation way in advance of anything we'd ever imagined Stone Age peoples being capable of.
That's wild, man.
Of course, the biggest question of all is, what on earth is this structure doing here?
Yeah.
You cannot come here without being made very aware of its positioning in relation to the sun. There are angles everywhere, and we know that it is aligned to the solar calendar. At the summer solstice, the longest day of the year,
that's kind of like what I was trying to ask.
Just over that heel stone right over there. And then in the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, at sunset, the sun would have set right between the two uprights of this trilithon here. One of them has now fallen on the ground. That's the lintel, and that one, though, is still upstanding. That's the tallest stone on this site. Look how high it is, and it goes down 2.5 meters underground as well. So this trilithon would have the sun setting in between it, and that sun would have flashed off this altar stone here, brought here from the wild country of the Brecon Beacons. And the fact that it's off centre, this is the centre of the circle, could possibly mean that the winter solstice was almost more important than the summer solstice. So you'd stand here and watch that sun go down, it would flash off the altar stone, and that would tell you that from henceforth, those days were only be longer. That sun was going to be regaining its power, and life was going to return to the fields and the forests of these people's world.
That's wild, man.
Modern laser scans have shown us that Stonehenge continued to be important for generations of people long after the original builders had...
Hold on. What in the world? Is this just people have come in here and carved their initials and stuff in here? And what is this right here? If anybody knows what all this is, let me know in the comments.
Died. This is graffiti or carving of a knife. And we know it's from the Bronze Age, around 1800 BC, so centuries after these stones were erected here. And the laser scan also showed alongside this knife, there are dozens of axe heads. So clearly, in the Bronze Age, it was an important place to come as well, perhaps with a sacred function as well.
So interesting.
Above it, you get slightly more prosaic graffiti. You've got people that visited in the early modern period, it looks like, but the most famous visitor inscribed his name on a standing stone just over there. We think this is Christopher Wren. You've got the cross there, so Christopher, the cross, the Christian cross, and then Wren, W-R-E-N, one of the most famous architects in the history of the world, who built St. Paul's Cathedral, Royal Hospital, Chelsea, the Greenwich Naval Hospital, all of the magnificent buildings of late 17th century England. And he came here, he was a local boy, and he must have been inspired. And people say the shape of Stonehenge the proportions of Stonehenge are visible in his plans for his magnificent domed cathedral.
That's interesting.
Paul's in London.
Stonehenge remains a place of inspiration and discovery. To find out about the latest research, I met up with Heather Sabir, a senior curator here at Stonehenge.
Heather, presumably what we know about this place is being transformed by the archaeology, the satellite technology, what we're able to tell from this landscape now.
Absolutely, particularly over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of research going on, not so much right in here inside the stone circle, but certainly in the landscape. And it almost reflects the development of archaeology as a discipline. You're quite right, the science has moved on so much, and there's different aspects of the science. We can now do so much with geophysical techniques, remote sensing, both from the air and on the ground. And the biological science, if you like, people are examining deposits on pottery and flint and can tell so much more now than we could 20 years ago.
Well, because I remember when I started to come here and take an interest in these things, you know, as a kid, there was no talk about the landscape. It was Stonehenge, the circle, this was it. And now, every time you hear about this place, it's very much more, it's part of this extraordinary Neolithic landscape.
Absolutely, and that's the one message we hope we get through to everyone through our interpretation and the New Visitor Centre exhibition and everything, that this amazing monument does not stand on its own. It is part of a very complex landscape. It's the biggest stone circle.
Look how big those are.
This one is unique because it's
Wow.
architectural. If we just look up, you can see we've got a classic trilithon here behind us, the two uprights with the lintel, and of course trilithon is just the Greek three stones. But it's the technology they've used is really quite amazing because this is very dense sandstone. So it really is quite amazing. But one of the most significant things for the research that went into the visitor centre was we managed to do a laser scan of every stone, and that gave us a huge amount of information.
Wow.
On different levels.
Whoa.
First of all, it recorded every stone in great detail.
Hold on, I want to see that again. Hold on, let's see, just a little bit. Wow, so all of these little dots are stones, and you can see how they are actually in a circle format, and they get kind of thicker in this line right here, and then thicker in this line. Interesting. You know, he said it kind of like almost like a calendar in a way. Maybe that's what it is, but whoever these people were, they obviously, man, it took some skill to do this, and they were working across many dozens, if not hundreds of miles, depending on where they were grabbing the rocks, the stones from. That took some cooperation with a number of different, tribes. I don't really understand exactly, but it just makes you think like, wow, okay.
Amount of information on different levels. First of all, it recorded every stone in great detail and prehistoric features as well as more modern features. It gave us more information about how it's all put together, and crucially, it confirmed that it is built on a northeast-southwest axis,
Wow.
which is what the solstice alignment is based on.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there's that. I forgot what he called this stone right here, or this pillar right here. Was this the one that lined up with the sun during the summer solstice? I believe it was. Anyway, I'll have to go back and check that out. But yeah, this looks like, I don't know if this was finished or not, but it looked like they were trying to make a complete circle here, and maybe they just never finished. Because I mean, some of these capstones are missing, and I don't know if they were going to have all these capstones on here eventually. That's wild, man. I can just imagine this. Looking now at this kind of openness, I can just imagine what this would have been like to people coming out of the forest into this, vast openness and seeing what would have been, much whiter or lighter colored stone glistening in the sun. I can imagine it would have been just a sight to behold, especially back then. I mean, even now it is. I think for me, it's more about like, how in the world did these people thousands of years ago, do this? Transport these insanely huge pillars of stone.
Just so dizzying, the technology, the how, like the mathematics that they had access
Right.
to. And
But
yet
when you
The
think
leveling.
about it, they probably did have people we would call mathematicians.
I'm sure they did,
you
some
know,
sort.
engineers,
Had to have.
astronomers, you know, as well as people who were good at farming and growing crops and you know, making lovely decorative things as well.
Before I ask about the rest of the landscape, can we just talk about the circles just a little bit more? Has anything ever been found with archaeology in here? Are there graves or deposits within this space?
Yes, absolutely, because one of the first things that happens is they enclose the space outside the stone part of the monument with a bank and a ditch. And when that was cut around about 3000 BC, it would have been gleaming white on the landscape. And it has two entrances, again, one to the northeast horizon where the sunrise comes up on midsummer morning, and then one slightly to the northwest. And just inside the bank and ditch is a series of 56 pits that are famously known as the Aubrey holes after the antiquarian Sir John Aubrey who discovered them, and they hold cremation burials. So this site is still the largest cremation cemetery known in Britain. And,
What?
After excavations in the 1900s on one of the Aubrey holes, the finds were all sort of dumped back in. But archaeologists re-excavated one of the Aubrey holes, and there's been a lot of work done now on that cremated bone. And because they're prehistoric cremations, there's still quite a lot of bone material that survives, because obviously they wouldn't get the high temperatures that modern cremations would. And so scientists have been able to find out quite a lot just from that one Aubrey hole. There were at least 60 individuals, some men, some women, and a few children. And from isotopic work, which is, you know, analysis, further analysis, it looks as if those people may have grown up on a granite soil, which is why there is a thought that they may have been associated with where the bluestones are found in Wales, for example.
Interesting.
So, as I say, the science just is fantastic. What can be done today?
Well, that's something I never would have guessed, that this is actually a cemetery as well. It's a cremation cemetery. I'm guessing they've never found actual, full bones here. I guess they would have said that, but what is this? I mean, it sounds like a calendar. It sounds like a cremation site. It's obviously, it was very important to whoever built this. I mean, this was you don't go through the effort to do this, to make it so precise and drag these stone from so far away and build it this so perfectly for just some kind of decoration. It had to have very real significance, probably in some sort of religious, spiritual way, I'm guessing. That's
what really strikes me about this site is you get a strong sense there's a British component here as well, and people from all over the Isles bringing animals here, bringing stones, and then perhaps bringing themselves as well.
And the other thing is, we know nobody was living here, so it's definitely,
how do they know
whatever
that?
you like to call it, a spiritual site, a temple.
Okay.
Somewhere where people are gathering, and because of the shape of it, we're still not quite sure, what actually went on here, whether there were rituals, whether most people were outside. If you think of a modern day cathedral, it's all divided up into different areas. Some people might have been in, whether it was more important to be inside than outside. These are intangible things we'll never know, but we can just, use our own belief systems.
It's fun to think about things like that.
To try and guess at what they were doing.
I do wonder, what in the world was this for?
Clearly, I mean, there's so many humps and bumps. It feels like a very active prehistoric landscape.
It is. It's full of archaeology, which is another reason why it became a World Heritage Site. And up on the ridge here, you can see a Bronze Age barrow cemetery. So these people came after the main period of the stone monument was in use. And people are buried in those, we think, elite of some sort.
So those are Bronze Age, they're centuries after Stonehenge.
Absolutely, and their technology, they had the use of metal. Quite often you hear about magic metal because, of course, they could do so many more things with metal than they could with stone. And so the axe becomes a symbol of the Bronze Age, almost like currency as well as being useful tools. And there are axes inscribed on the stones. You can't see most of them with the naked eye, but through our laser scan, we discovered there's over 100 of them. So Bronze Age people were coming and making their mark as well. And the burials are almost on a 360 around the stone circle.
That's so cool, man.
And almost as if they're looking into Stonehenge. So perhaps at the time of Stonehenge, people were looking out, but certainly in the Bronze Age, we think people may have been looking in.
So it just made me think, so people from the Bronze Age, so long after these were built, you got to wonder what those individuals were thinking about this place. Since they were probably much closer to the time these were built, did they understand more about what this site was for? Or did they discover it and then it was just as much of a mystery to them as it is to us? I guess that's something we'll never know, I guess.
No, it's not the fashion these days, but I would love to see this big sarsen put back down that lintel so that we could get that winter solstice sunset.
Lots of us would, but if you really look at it, Dan, you can see that it's a very peculiar stone. It's obviously broken, and it had this sort of lip at the bottom, and we wonder whether it actually ever stood properly. It probably fell in antiquity, and it's so chunky compared to this beautiful one.
I know, it doesn't look the same.
No,
does
it doesn't. And the lintel is on the ground next to you there, and you can see how chunky it is as well. It's almost as if it was never finished.
Never finished?
Yes.
Is that a new theory? So Stonehenge was never finished?
Well, the jury is still out, to be honest, as to whether the outer circle was ever complete. There's a wonderful Inigo Jones drawing.
Oh, yeah, this is kind of what I was curious about. This is kind of looking at it, I'm curious if this is what they were creating, almost like a Colosseum sorts. So, man, that's so interesting. But it sounds like if that stone she's talking about laying on the ground, if it's kind of chunky and whatnot, perhaps they actually, rounded off and smoothed out the stones on site instead of doing it, wherever they came from and then dragging them or bringing them in somehow. Maybe they actually did that on site, which would make more sense,
That shows it very geometrical and completed. But in fact, at this bit behind us, which is sort of the back towards the southwest, you can see that some of the outer stones are not really as tall as the rest of the uprights. So it's quite interesting as to whether, I think some prehistorians think, of course it must have been finished, a bit like the pyramids. And then other people think, well, maybe just the coming together and the erecting of these stones was so difficult that they did it in generations. Perhaps, they had a bad harvest or something, and they
had to take generations, many generations.
We really won't know. But a few years ago, after a very dry summer, some parch marks showed up. So those are marks where you can see there's been something, and it looked as if the stone outer circle did carry on. But this particular stone behind us, you can see, is not as tall as the other ones. So it's
where did they go?
Quite problematic to try and work out whether the outer circle was actually complete.
Oh, I don't know how you guys do it. So many unknowns.
But in a way, that's why prehistory is so important, because there's nothing written down. We do have to use the evidence to try and work out what these people were doing and thinking. And
I'm just looking at the graffiti behind you there. You've got to remember that history had a relationship with Stonehenge. It was always an ancient monument to our ancestors. Do we know what the Romans and then the Saxons and then subsequent peoples made of it?
Well, I must admit, I think one of the amazing things is that so much of it survives, but I think it's partly because it would have been quite tricky to remove it. Bits have been taken away, we're pretty sure, and bits have been knocked off. But the Romans definitely were in this landscape. There's a big monument called Vespasian's Camp, just over to the southeast. And there has been Roman pottery found within the circle, so they probably came and wondered themselves what was going on, but they respected it. They didn't try and take it apart.
How could you not respect something like that, man?
And then later in medieval times, we know that sort of tracks, roadways went past, and it turns up in documents quite early on. around about the 1000s with Geoffrey of Monmouth. And then you get all the lovely stories about Merlin coming over and putting the lintels on the top and things like that. So there's a whole mythology around Stonehenge as well. And then, yes, this graffiti behind me might be related to the very first image we have of Stonehenge in the 1600s, and Lucas de Frere. He was from what is now, I think it's the Netherlands rather than Belgium, who came and made a drawing.
Okay, this drawing, actually, I'd have to look at it again, but is it just me, or does it seem like more of these capstones were on in this drawing than are on currently? I'd have to go back and see, but maybe we'll see currently again.
We've got some wonderful antiquarian images of the stones, and not only are they wonderful, I mean, you know, paintings by Constable and Turner and what have you, but they give you quite a lot of information because they're like a little time capsule with artistic license, of course, in the likes of Constable and Turner. But a lot of the etchings that were done are very, very useful over the years. So yes, it has a sort of modern history as well as a prehistory.
And every time I come here every couple of years to talk to you guys, because there's always new evidence. There's always, you are always discovering new stuff. And just recently there was that big story as well.
Yeah. Yes, you probably heard that they've found an incredible landscape feature, again, just up to the northwest. And the henge site that's known as Durrington Walls is massive. It's much bigger here than Stonehenge, but they found something even bigger again. So, and that is all through geophysical techniques, because again, the science is, there's so many different techniques you can use today. And they've been able to plot a series of huge pits that takes in the monument of Durrington Walls, but also Woodhenge, that's another one that English Heritage looks after, which is a smaller version of Stonehenge.
Who built that?
It is thought to have had some stone components, but we think that the circular arrangement of what is now pits held upright timbers. So it would have been a timber monument, a bit like Stonehenge, and it wouldn't have been solid, but with the different arrangement of timbers, again, it probably would have looked as if it was like a wall of timber, even though there would have been gaps between them.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The reason that people are so excited about it is because it also demonstrates the ability, the mathematical abilities, astronomical abilities of our prehistoric ancestors.
Yeah, yeah. It's so huge. I think I'm right in saying, I'm just assimilating the paper myself from last week. It's so huge, I think they feel that they must have had some way of measuring distance. But when you think about it, you know, I'm quite good at pacing out what is now called a meter, you know. So, and you know, people in the 1960s talked about the megalithic yard and all of that. So, and again, they were just as clever as us. So it's quite feasible that they had some form of counting system and, you know, equivalent of surveyors or whatever, but it still is quite massive. And I, you know,
what form would that site have? Is it like the Woodhenge? There would have just been very spread out, but just
no,
monumental stones or wood?
Pits, shafts, whatever you like to call them. I think I'm right in saying they are absolutely massive. So I think the people who've put the paper together, the archaeologists who've got the data, are still trying to assimilate it all themselves and decide what it means on the landscape.
So just huge holes in the ground.
Yeah. Yes, but must have had some meaning because the effort it would have taken to dig them. I don't know if you know, at the site of Avebury there's a famous picture of the ditch, which is absolutely ginormous. There's sort of like 3 layers of people standing on different terraces.
Where is that at?
And it's on the scale of that, you know. And of course they didn't have mechanical diggers, they were digging with antler picks.
That's crazy, man.
But they must have had a reason why they wanted to do it.
And what other secrets is this landscape going to give up over the next few years?
Well, I think that's the amazing thing about archaeology. It never stops. You know, just when you think you've got the measure of it all, something else turns up. And again, that is down to the science and being able to do. We can do so much more today that doesn't need excavation. We don't have to go into the ground. You know, we can do remote work now and landscape work without actually excavating.
What's so fascinating is that this site, which is so old, so familiar, is actually producing such extraordinary cutting-edge data and new information. New technology is allowing us to tell the story, to reveal the story of Stonehenge that was totally obscure to previous generations. The story of this place is by no means finished.
Man, guys, I'm so glad I checked that out. What an awesome video. I'd heard, this place was really cool, and it definitely is. Definitely a place I look forward to visiting when I get over to the UK. I think you have to. This is one of those types of places you just have to get over and check out when you're somewhere in the vicinity of it. I know they were talking about, like, they must have had, mathematicians and, engineers or whatever, right, to erect something like this. And absolutely, I can't imagine you just had, a bunch of just regular, people that didn't have any community organization and didn't have any knowledge of mathematics or engineering or, anything like that, building something like that. It's no way. They had to have, they had to be more advanced scientifically than you would probably think about people being, that long ago. I think we generally don't think of people, from many thousands of years ago being very scientifically advanced, but looking at how they were able to level this based off of the change in the landscape, they had to have some advanced knowledge that we would not otherwise imagine them having. And I swear, guys, this looks like, to me, and I could be wrong, and it sounds like they don't really know for sure, but to me, this looks like this was going to be a perfect circle. I mean, it just does. And what would this be? I don't know. I'd love to hear what ideas, you have about this place. What do you think this was ultimately meant to be? Did it ever ultimately serve the purpose of what it was going to be? Obviously, this is something that probably took many generations. Was it just, did they not finish it? And so they were never able to fully use it for what it was supposed to be for? Or is this a site that they used, and even though they didn't fully finish it, or was it never really used for the purpose it was meant for? I'm guessing it was used for some sort of spiritual purpose, religious ceremonies or something like that. And it probably had something to do with them maybe worshiping, kind of the stars or something astrologically, based off the fact of it was kind of set up as a calendar a little bit, but I have no idea. This is the type of thing I really enjoy pondering and thinking about. And I'd love to, if anybody has any information outside of what they shared here that's that you think I might find interesting about this place, feel free to share it. Something else I'm curious about. I'm personally someone who believes that there are energy or energetic vortexes in different areas on our planet, places that the energy is just vibrating at an extremely high speed, and so to speak. And it's, how you get when you go into certain areas, it's just like you can feel the change in energy. I'm curious what this energy feels like here. I have a feeling that it's a very unique and interesting energy to feel. Could be wrong, but it just looks like that type of place. And I don't know, there's something interesting about this place. There's something very special about this place. And I just wish I knew what it was originally intended for. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments or suggestions about this video or others. And don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow me on my journey to discover my British and Irish ancestry. Till next time, guys. Peace.